All right, settle in because today I've got three stories for you that are going to burrow deep under your skin and stay there. These aren't just tales whispered in the dark. These are harrowing experiences that real people endured, moments where the fabric of their reality was torn apart by fear and the unexplainable. We often look to the authorities, to the police, as a beacon of safety, a line of defense against the dangers that lurk in the shadows. We trust that they have the training, the resources, and the determination to confront any threat and bring resolution. But what happens when the threat is something beyond their understanding, something that leaves even seasoned officers baffled and helpless? Tonight we're diving into three such accounts. Each one is a chilling reminder that sometimes the shield and the uniform are no match for the terrors that can creep into our lives. We're talking about situations where every protocol was followed, every lead pursued, and yet the police found themselves at a dead end, unable to provide answers, unable to offer protection, and ultimately unable to save those in peril. These are the stories that highlight a terrifying vulnerability, the moments when you realize you're truly on your own against an unseen, unknown, or untouchable adversary. So, turn down the lights if you dare, and prepare yourself. We're about to explore the unsettling reality of what happens when the emergency call goes unanswered, not by neglect, but by the sheer terrifying inadequacy of conventional means against the unconventional horrors that await. These are the stories of when the police failed to save, not for lack of trying, but because some nightmares simply refuse to be caught, explained, or stopped by human hands, no matter how dedicated. Our first story takes us deep into the sprawling, ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, a place of breathtaking beauty, but also a place where the trees hold secrets and the trails can lead you into oblivion. This is where an experienced hiker, let's call him David, a man who knew these woods like the back of his hand, ventured out for a solo day trip. He was meticulous, always informing friends of his route, his expected return time, carrying all the essential gear. He wasn't a novice. He respected the wilderness, but on this particular crisp autumn afternoon, the wilderness seemed to have other plans for him, plans that no map could predict. David's friends raised the alarm when he failed to check in by nightfall. Initially there was concern, but not outright panic. Maybe he'd taken a longer route, maybe his phone battery died. But as the hours ticked by, a gnawing dread began to set in. The local sheriff's department was notified, and a search was organized for First Light. They knew David, knew his capabilities. Surely, they thought, he'd be found hunkered down, waiting for sunrise, perhaps with a twisted ankle or a minor inconvenience. They couldn't have fathomed the silence that awaited them, a silence that would soon swallow all hope whole. The search began with a grim determination. Teams fanned out. K9 units sniffed the cold trails. Helicopters whirred overhead, their spotlights cutting through the dense canopy. They found his car at the trailhead, parked exactly where he said it would be. His emergency pack, however, was still inside, which was the first truly unsettling sign. Why would David, so prepared, leave his survival gear behind? The officers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't adding up. Days turned into a week, the search area expanding, more volunteers joining the increasingly desperate effort, but the forest yielded nothing. Not a footprint out of place, not a torn piece of clothing, not a single sign of David's passage. The police interviewed everyone who knew him, anyone who might have seen him that day. They retraced his planned route countless times, then deviated, checking every ravine, every cave, every dense thicket. The K9S, usually so reliable, seemed confused, their trails going cold almost immediately as if David had simply vanished into thin air. Theories abounded. An animal attack, a sudden medical episode, even foul play, though there was zero evidence to support any of it. The officers, hardened by years on the job, found themselves increasingly frustrated, facing an invisible wall. The woods were vast, yes, but it felt like something more, something actively concealing him. Ultimately, with heavy hearts and no further leads, the official search had to be scaled back, then eventually called off. David was declared a missing person, presumed lost to the unforgiving wilderness. His family and friends were left with a gaping void, a storm of unanswered questions, and the chilling realization that despite the best efforts of law enforcement, the forest had claimed David, and the police, for all their resources and dedication, could do nothing to bring him back or even explain how he had been so utterly and completely erased from the world the whispers of the wild kept their secret. Our next story shifts from the untamed wilderness to the supposed safety of suburbia, where a young woman named Sarah found her life transformed into a waking nightmare. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, a feeling of being watched as she walked home from work, items on her porch slightly rearranged, a fleeting shadow glimpsed from the corner of her eye. At first she dismissed it as stress, an overactive imagination. But the incidents grew more frequent, more blatant, and undeniably more terrifying. She started receiving hang-up calls, dozens a day, always silent, always from a blocked number. Then came the notes, unsigned, left on her car windshield, detailing her movements, her habits, things no stranger should know. Sarah, understandably terrified, went to the police. She showed them the notes, described the unsettling occurrences, the constant feeling of being observed. The officers were sympathetic, took a report, and advised her to be vigilant, to install better locks, maybe get a security camera. They patrolled her neighborhood more frequently for a while, but with no concrete evidence of a crime beyond harassment and no identifiable suspect, their hands were largely tied. The stalker was like smoke, always present, yet impossible to grasp. Sarah felt a cold dread. The police were trying, but this unseen tormentor was always one step ahead, reveling in their elusiveness. The terror escalated. One evening, Sarah came home to find her back door unlocked, though she was certain she'd locked it. Nothing was stolen, but a single dead rose lay on her pillow. Her blood ran cold. She called the police again, frantic. They came, they searched, they dusted for prints, but found nothing conclusive. The stalker was meticulous, leaving no trace, almost as if they knew police procedure. The officers expressed their frustration. They believed her, they saw her fear, but without a suspect, without a clear break, they were chasing a ghost. They suggested she stay with friends or family, a temporary solution to an escalating, invisible threat. Living in a constant state of hypervigilance took its toll. Sarah barely slept, jumped at every sound, saw suspicion in every passing stranger. Her work suffered, her friendship strained under the weight of her perpetual fear. The police would check in, but their visits became less frequent as new cases demanded their attention. They hadn't forgotten her, but the stalker provided no new leads for them to follow. It was a maddening cycle, an act of intimidation, a call to the police, an investigation that led nowhere, and then the agonizing wait for the stalker's next move. She felt utterly exposed, the police a distant, increasingly powerless comfort. To this day, Sarah's stalker has never been identified, never been caught. The police files remain open, a cold case gathering dust. Sarah eventually moved to a different city, changed her name, and tried to rebuild her life. But the psychological scars remain. She lives with the terrifying knowledge that someone out there watched her, terrorized her, and got away with it, completely evading the grasp of the law. The police, despite their best intentions, could not penetrate the veil of anonymity her tormentor wore, leaving her to fight her own battles against a shadow that haunted her every step. Our final story takes us inside the four walls of what was supposed to be a dream home for the Peterson family, a father, mother, and two young children. They'd bought an old Victorian house, full of character, needing a little love. But soon after moving in, the charm began to curdle into something deeply unsettling. It started with small things, doors creaking open or slamming shut on their own, objects moving from where they were left, cold spots that would appear and disappear without reason. The children began talking about the man in the shadows and the whispering lady, things the parents initially dismissed as vivid imaginations adjusting to a new, creaky house. But then the activity escalated. Loud bangs would erupt from empty rooms in the middle of the night, jolting the entire family awake. Footsteps would be heard pacing the upstairs hallway when everyone was downstairs. One evening, As Mrs. Peterson was cooking dinner, every cabinet door in the kitchen flew open simultaneously with a deafening crash. Terrified, they called the police. The officers who responded were polite, but skeptical. They walked through the house, flashlights cutting through the dim evening light, finding nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of forced entry, no logical explanation for the family's fear. They chalked it up to an old house settling, or perhaps a prank. The Petersons felt dismissed, but the torment continued, growing more personal, more malevolent. Whispers seemed to follow them from room to room, sometimes calling their names. The children would wake up screaming, claiming something had touched them in the dark. Mr. Peterson, a pragmatic man, set up cameras, hoping to catch a rational explanation, perhaps a very clever intruder. But the cameras captured nothing, even as the terrifying events unfolded right in front of them. Again and again they called the police, each call more desperate than the last. Each time, officers would arrive, conduct a thorough search and find absolutely nothing. They saw the genuine fear in the family's eyes, but their hands were tied. There was no crime they could see, no perpetrator they could arrest. The police started to dread the calls from the Peterson house. They weren't unsympathetic, but what could they do? They suggested psychological evaluations, checked for carbon monoxide leaks, anything to find a rational cause. But all tests came back normal. The family felt increasingly isolated, trapped with an unseen enemy that law enforcement couldn't even acknowledge, let alone combat. One officer on his third visit quietly told Mr. Peterson that some things just couldn't be explained by conventional means, a chilling admission of helplessness from a man sworn to protect. The badge, the gun, the training, none of it mattered against whatever was in that house. Eventually, broken and terrified, the Peterson family abandoned their dream home, fleeing with only what they could carry. They left behind a house filled with their belongings and their shattered peace of mind. The police officially closed their file, noting unsubstantiated claims of disturbance. For the Petersons, it was a horrifying lesson. Some terrors are beyond the reach of the law, some calls for help will go fundamentally unanswered, not because no one is listening, but because no one knows how to fight an enemy they cannot see, hear, or understand. The house remained a silent testament to their ordeal. And there you have it, 3 stories that pull back the curtain on a particularly unsettling truth. Sometimes, the very systems we rely on for safety and justice can find themselves utterly outmatched. When the perpetrator is a phantom, when the wilderness itself seems to conspire against discovery, or when the threat emanates from a place beyond our understanding, the badge and the siren offer little solace. These accounts aren't meant to diminish the hard work and dedication of law enforcement officers, but rather to highlight those terrifying fringe instances where the unknown rears its head and leaves everyone, including the authorities, grasping for answers that simply aren't there. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? To be in a situation so dire, so terrifying, and to realize that the help you're desperately seeking cannot reach you, not through any fault of their own, but because the nature of your crisis defies conventional solutions. These stories remind us that for all our advancements and understanding, there are still shadows in the world, mysteries that resist explanation, and fears that must be faced alone, or at least without the definitive intervention we've come to expect from those sworn to protect. And I'm incredibly curious to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable where authorities were unable to help? Or perhaps you know of a story that echoes the themes we've explored tonight. Please share your experiences and insights in the comments below. These conversations are important because sometimes just knowing you're not alone in facing the incomprehensible can be a comfort in itself. Thanks for watching, and try not to think too much about what might be out there just beyond the reach of the flashing blue lights. Stay safe.